When we think of the pinnacle of an artist's creation, we imagine an original idea brought to life, a product of pure, unfettered inspiration. In reality, some of the most famous and recognized masterpieces of the world's art were, in fact, commissions. Often, an artist's job is to find the perfect embodiment for a client's request. And such a challenge may require expanding horizons and reaching a new level. This is exactly what happened to me. The client's wonderful ideas forced me to break boundaries and create one of my most beautiful and intricate dolls to date. My name is Sophie. I'm a professional doll artist. Today I will tell you the story of making a very special ball-jointed doll. From preparing a concept to crafting the doll from porcelain, all the way to creating an elaborate one-of-a-kind costume. Buckle up and enjoy this creative journey. Before I start working on the doll, I have to devise her look in detail. Sometimes I begin making a doll without a concrete idea in mind, but since this doll is a commission, I have to first present the concepts to the client. Based on the description and references I was given, I prepared two versions of the costume. The client requested a doll with strawberry blonde hair, dressed in a long, elegant gown of blush pink color. The main highlight of this costume is a flower crown that incorporates baby's breath. After some discussion and adding lace and embroidery to the dress, the final concept turned out like this. I am beyond excited to work on this beautiful character, so let's move on to its embodiment. The first phase of making a costume doll is crafting a doll itself. My material of choice for all of my creations is porcelain, and to make a doll from porcelain, I use a technique known as slip casting. The slip is a liquid mixture of porcelain clay with water. In this method, it is cast in plaster molds. You can see how I prepare said molds for the casting process. I clean them up with a brush and secure the parts tightly with rubber bands. Essentially, a ball-jointed doll is a set of body parts and joints, and there is a mold for each of these parts. The inside of every mold replicates the shape of a certain piece: the head, the torso, the arms and legs, and so on. The tiniest of molds is this one for the fingers. The knuckles of my dolls are articulated, and each tiny finger is cast in its own mold. The molds are prepared, and now it's time for the slip. Yes, I keep it in ice cream tubs, and it's very convenient. I strain the liquid porcelain through nylon to ensure it's smooth and uniform. Then I started to carefully pour the slip. One by one, I filled the molds up, and the casts started to form inside. The molds I am working with are crafted off of a 45 cm doll model that I created back in 2019. Sadly, I don't have a video dedicated to crafting this very model, but I have a few photos from when I was working on her. As all of my creations, this model was sculpted by me from scratch, with no machinery, 3D printing or pre-made parts. Meanwhile, all molds were filled, and the plaster did its magic trick. Now, plaster is a porous material, and the gimmick of these molds is that they draw the water out from the slip. As the slip is losing moisture, a layer of harder clay forms against the inner surface of the mold. You can visibly see how the level of slip drops. That's the water being absorbed by plaster. To keep the cast forming, the molds must be full, so I added more slip a few times. When the casts reached the required thickness, I poured the excess slip out. That's why inside they are hollow. This will be very important later, as the structure that keeps the ball-jointed doll together and ensures its mobility is hidden inside. The cast had time to partially harden, and I could open up the molds. Finding the right moment to open a mold is, in fact, a quite fine thing. I gently push my tool between the mold's part and kind of check if it's ready to open for me and reveal what's inside. Luckily, it is. The doll's parts, still soft and malleable, are carefully removed from the molds. While they are still damp, I remove the spruce and cut necessary holes for future assembly. This doll, being bigger and more elaborated than the other dolls I've shown on the channel, consists of 32 individual parts, 10 of which are her tiny articulated fingers. Each of them needs to be refined by hand. The smaller the parts is, the more manual labor it requires. The last to emerge from the mold is the face. The face mold the client chose was Magnolia, the most popular of my dolls. Her face, fresh from the mold, is far from her final look. Not only the plaster isn't able to replicate the small details, but also I've been using this mold a lot, maybe too much, and it had seen better times. This is the next to last Magnolia. I only have one more doll of this face type to create, and this mold will have to retire, and there will be no more Magnolias. But worry not. I will do everything necessary to turn this workpiece into a refined face. In fact, all the pieces need some attention. As you can see, they have visible seams, uneven surface and lack small details. This is the normal outcome for the slip casting technique, but I have to address all those imperfections. First of all, I whipped out my X-Acto knife, removed the seams and did some initial cleanup. And then I deployed my tabletop vent and put on a mask, because it was time to sand every single part. Sanding is a quite straightforward process, but it requires a very light hand. That's because the raw porcelain casts are very fragile. They can crack on your hands, and it's easy to push too hard and sand away too much, thus destroying the sculpt. To amend this, I push very lightly and use sanding sponges instead of sandpaper. These are much softer and they shape to the surface of the piece, therefore do not grind away the delicate clay. Porcelain as a medium has a long and complicated history. This queen of ceramic clays originated in China, and it was a very slow process of discovery and refinement over the centuries. Some researchers state that fine clays, the predecessors of porcelain, date as far as year 2000 or even 3000 before Common Era. Yet the porcelain as we know it was invented during the late Sui or early Tang dynasty, about year 600 Common Era. We have surviving pieces from all the way back to 7th century, and they are as beautiful as new. Even the painting on them is as vivid as it was centuries back. That is the superpower of porcelain. It is immortal. Time literally has no control over it. When the sanding was done, it was time to add the lacking details to some parts of the doll. And the first to go and in most need for attention is the face. She already has all of her features, but they need to be sharpened and refined so we can see her in her full glory. With the smallest tool, a needle, I started to carve out her eyes, not changing their shape, but just accentuating it. I proceeded to the other features. I worked on her nose, the mouth, and carved the teeth between her parted lips. With this handiwork, her image starts to come through, as well as, I think, her personality. This need of hand refinement is inevitable when working with porcelain, and that's what makes each doll, even of the same face mold, a character of their own. When the features were accentuated, I moved on to adding the finest of details. With a touch of a brush dipped in sleep, I drew a tiny raised line around her lips. Then I carved her upper and lower eyelids. Her ears were given shape and definition. And last, I carved wrinkles on her lips. The doll's face was complete, at least so far. Next in line is the most delicate and miniature part of the doll, the ball-jointed fingers. Each of the 10 comes out from the mold only as a template. I need to smooth and refine them and work on the joints so they can actually function. Each of the fingers was given a slot for the elastic and 2 holes on the sides in which a metal bar will be placed. The bar will secure the elastic that attaches the fingers to the hands, thus allowing their movement. This is a long and tedious process that takes a few full working days, but I really don't mind it. I've done it so many times that my hands practically do the work for me. So I turned on a YouTube video that over-explains a niche topic that I don't really need in my life, and let myself be in the flow. With the joints finished, I added definition to every finger. I carved the nails as well as folds and wrinkles on the knuckles. After fingers were prepared, I walked on the palms. There are just 2 of them, so it felt like a walk in the park, but the palms need no less attention. I made sure that the slots for the fingers are smooth and even, then added the wrinkles on the skin to match the explicit details on the rest of the doll. The very last but not least part to refine are the feet. These once again come from the mold as a mere template, so I manually separated the toes, carved the nails and added details to each one. The very last step before the doll is fired in the kiln and the true beauty of porcelain is revealed is wet sanding. But the raw porcelain dissolves in water, so in order to smooth the parts as much as I can, I did something called a bisque or biscuit firing. This term can be used broadly, but in my case it stands for an intermediate firing at low temperature that allows for clay to partially harden but not reach its final state. Most of the time this is done to glaze the pieces. However, I work with parent porcelain, well known for its translucence and smooth texture. Covering it with glaze would be a crime, but the smoother the surface is now, the more beautiful it looks on the finished piece, so I implemented the bisque firing technique to do yet another round of sanding and make sure there is not a single scratch anywhere on the doll. The entire doll is finally prepared for the grand transformation. Ahead of her is the most extreme of treatments. She will be exposed to 1200 degrees Celsius, and the clay she is made of will sinter, shrink, and change beyond recognition. In order to help her survive this treatment, I put kaolin wool into each part to support them from the inside at the peak of the heat. Then I place the parts on the layer of silica sand, so they don't flatten at the bottom. And finally, the doll is put in the kiln. I set the program, and all left to do is wait. 24 hours later, the kiln had heated up and cooled down. The doll, transformed to her final state, is ready to be taken out. Now you can see the porcelain in its full glory, the solid, smooth, translucent material that looks so otherworldly and yet so much like human skin. The pieces shrunk about 20% in volume, and they are now dense and heavy. No matter how many porcelain pieces I created and how many firing cycles I performed, every time I get incredibly excited to witness this transformation. This is pure magic, and nobody can tell me otherwise. With the firing performed and the porcelain base of the doll done, it is time to move on to the more and more creative parts of this journey. Now let's complete her features and truly give her life with a touch of paint. Well, to be more accurate, a lot of touches. Porcelain is painted with china paints, which are the colorful mixture of pigment powders. These powders are mixed with medium and oil-based liquid, thus creating the actual paint. Each layer of paint is fired in the kiln. This time a much lower temperature is required. After being exposed to 800 degrees Celsius, the paint is bonded to the porcelain forever. It will never fade or wipe off. I applied the paints to the face, gradually building up the shading and the blush. The paints are translucent and they require a few layers for the color to be vivid and for the transitions to be smooth. With the initial base of shading ready, I started to draw the details, such as eyebrows and irises. The client asked for the face painting to be similar to the original Magnolia, with blue eyes, fair eyebrows and freckles. They specifically requested freckles, so I started adding those early on. However, similar does not mean the same. Even if I use the same paint and look at the reference, I am not a machine. With the hand-carved features and hand-painted, every doll ends up with a unique personality of their own. If something is handmade, it is by default one of a kind. So, to make sure I am on the right track, I sent multiple photos to the client for approval as I worked on the doll. Meanwhile, more and more details are being added. I turn to the tiniest of brushes and paint the eyebrow hairs, the lashes, the pupils and shading in the eyes. The more gradually I do this, the more delicate is the outcome. I need at least 20 layers to complete the face painting, and each of them equals about 8 hours in the kiln, so I can only paint one layer in a day. The work is nearing its end, and it's time for the finishing touches. I paint sparkles in the eyes with white paint, as well as the teeth. To highlight the eyes and lips, I outlined them with the same paint, but much more diluted. And I added the last of freckles. The final time in the kiln, and the doll's face is finished. I haven't worked on those bigger dolls for a long time, and it was so nice to switch for the bigger canvas once in a while. I was spoiled with the amount of details I could paint, and it's so rewarding to see the result. Even though I just finished, I can't wait to work on more of those tall girls. The face is painted, but the doll still has the rest of the body to add color to. The well-familiar fingers came in first. With the same rosy paint I used on the cheeks, I added color to all the fingertips and then the palms and knuckles. Then it was time to accentuate the wrinkles. With a thin brush and diluted paint, I carefully outlined them all. And finally, time to paint the nails with the designated details. And not just the fingernails. Can't forget the toenails as well. The rest of the body is yet to be addressed. I added the shading in recessed areas all over the body to accentuate the sculpt. and then the blush to add life to the skin, as if there is real blood flow. Finally, I painted moles here and there, and as the doll has freckles on her face, those are also painted on her shoulders and chest. And that was the finishing touch. The painting process is officially complete. Before the doll is assembled, there is a small but very important step. You saw that I did not paint her upper lashes, and that's because I attached real lashes to her eyes. You can see how I applied them one by one with a tweezer, dipping each one in glue and carefully placing them in a precise order. This is a very delicate process, but I think the result speaks for itself. Now the preparation for assembly begins. First of all, I glued metal bars into each joint. The doll is assembled with an elastic cord, and these bars help to redistribute the tension of the elastic, ensuring the proper movement. Then I apply a thin layer of epoxy clay into some of the joints. The porcelain isn't as fragile as some may think, but it won't hurt to strengthen it in some places. Thus, nothing will crack when the owner is changing the poses. And last, all the joints are lined with suede. Porcelain should not be rubbed against porcelain, so a layer of soft buffer is added. I glued pieces of suede inside each joint slot, tucking it in so it's barely visible, or cutting the axis off with an X-Acto knife. Everything is prepared. The parts can be assembled together and finally become a doll. First of all, let's assemble the most delicate part, the hands. Those tiny fellas have a separate thin elastic that holds them together. This one is jewelry spandex, thin but very strong. The spandex is passed under the bar at each finger, back onto the hand, then out through the next knuckle and so on, until the whole hand is assembled. The ends of spandex are tied in the wrist. When the hands are put together, they can do some gesturing, even apart from the rest of the doll. Then it was time for the body. I prepared the elastic cord and started to slide the parts of the doll on it, like beads on a necklace. The head is attached with a hook. It has another bar between the ears, this one especially strong. Then the rest of the parts, one by one, were slid onto the elastic. The hands and feet were attached with more hooks, and the elastic slid inside, hiding from view and keeping the body together. The doll became whole. Now she can take any pose she wants. With the doll done, I can start bringing the rest of her image to life. I feel like she has a lot of character in her already, but without her hair and outfit, she is yet unfinished. The concept I prepared waited for this very moment, and it's time to work on her intricate costume. The hair I am giving to the doll is, in fact, a removable wig. I like when there's room for adjustment, so all my dolls wear wigs, in case the owner decides to switch up the looks. For the hair I am using Angora hair, a soft and delicate fiber, perfect for the doll's gentle and elegant look. I used the longest hair I had, and I dyed it the required strawberry blonde color. I attached hair lock by lock, moving from bottom to the top and from back to the front. And yes, I am using hot glue for this. This is the strongest and most durable glue I ever tried for wig making, and it's flexible, which is absolutely necessary. It's interesting how in human history the fashion of wearing wigs was inspired by royalty. The wigs were known and used all the way back in ancient Egypt, but in medieval Europe they were kind of forgotten. They became fashionable again, first for women, in the 16th century by the influence of Queen Elizabeth of England, and in the 17th century with King Louis XIV of France, this time for men. Both of those people used wigs to amend their hair loss. But apparently people were so impressed with the fantastical hairdos that they couldn't not make it a trend. Many of us know how far it went in the 18th century. When I reached the top of the head, I marked the line for the pattern and carefully cut along. I fed a lock of hair through the cut, which will become the pattern itself. The lock is secured with glue from the inside. For this bigger wig, I don't make the whole pattern in one go, instead working in sections. When all the hair for the pattern was in place, I divided the lock in half and brushed it down. The damp hair is covered with a piece of cloth to press it. When the pattern dries, the cloth is removed and the pattern stays securely in place. The last touch is to trim the hair, and I also styled it with a bit of foam to define the curls. It might be a weird thing to say, but the end result is incredibly nice to hold and stroke. I also covered the inside of the wig with a piece of cloth to make it extra neat. Thus, the wig is finished and the doll has her hair. Next, I moved on to the piece that is destined to crown her head, the silk flower headpiece. The flower crown is the most intricate piece of this costume, and the making of silk flowers is a whole artistic skill on its own. The flowers are crafted from natural silk fabric and shaped with heat. To prevent the fabric from fraying, I infused it with glue, then painted a pink ombre on the strips. Starting harsh, I diluted the paint more and more, until the transition was smooth. When the fabric dried, I cut out individual petals. When the general shape was cut, I added those tiny slits to give the petals a bit more dynamic. I don't know what is the exact number of petals I ended up with, but I made a total of 9 flowers with an average of 8 petals in each, so there should be around 72. When the petals were prepared, it was time to shape them. I carefully pressed a heated metal tool on silk, and veins appeared on the surface. Then with another tool I curled the edges, as they usually do on a rose or a briar. Then the third tool came in to curve the entirety of the petal. This tiny fella is done, only 71 more to go. As I mentioned, silk flowers are the form of art on their own, and their roots are spread deep in history. It is believed that the artistry of silk flowers originated in China 1500 years ago and spread in Europe as soon as silk reached the continent. Silk flowers boomed in popularity during the Victorian era, and at the time of the Industrial Revolution, there were factories dedicated solely to this product. Nowadays, industrial-made flowers are usually produced from synthetic materials, and they are much less intricate. However, the craft itself was not forgotten. There are many talented artists all over the world creating the most elaborate flowers from real silk. After many hours of heating and shaping, the petals were prepared and could be turned into flowers. To do so, I need to first make a base. A piece of cotton wool wrapped around a floristic wire and dipped in glue would play that role perfectly. The petals are arranged carefully around this base. I glued the first petal on, wrapping it around to hide the base, then added another and another. A silk rose starts to bloom. And so I prepared 9 tiny silk flowers. I made them of various stages of bloom to add dynamic to the finished piece. The wire was cut off, but before I attached the flowers to the headband, I decided to add a bit of greenery to the piece. I cut leaves out of silk ribbon, shaped them with heat, and attached a few to the base of every flower. Now the headpiece can be put together. I prepared a headband to the measurements of the doll's head and arranged the flowers carefully on top of it. I glued them with a carpentry-graded glue, which is very strong. You can see how I did it in this short montage, while in reality this process took a few hours. The glue has to cure every time I attached a flower before I could add the next one. The flowers are in place, and this could be the finished crown, but our concept states otherwise. The core component of the flower arrangement, the baby's breath, is missing. To create baby's breath, I don't make individual petals. What I did instead is I prepared numerous tiny squares of silk. I poked a hole in each one and slid them on a wire. The first one covers the base, the second is arranged in a petal-like manner. Then I cut the corners to make the shape more organic, and the tiniest of flowers is done. But one is far from enough to decorate the flower crown. Many more have to join it. This is by far the most complicated silk flower piece I ever created. I had to even craft a few practice flowers before I proceeded to the actual ones, so I was sure I make those as good as they can be. And I am very thankful for this challenge, as I got so much more skilled with this experience. Not only this very piece is turning great, but also from now on I will be implementing more flower elements into my other works. They would fit so perfectly with the line of my 45 cm dolls. It is called Flora Arcanum, which translates to Secret Flora, and each doll is a representation of a certain flower. There could not be a better match. After a very intense session of silk gardening, I prepared a handful of baby's breath. I don't even know how many is here. You can check if you want, I honestly lost count. It was time for the final decoration. I cut the wire on each flower, bent it slightly, dipped the end in glue and attached a flower carefully with the help of clippers. I placed them in between the roses, and I arranged the white flowers organically, not to break the flow of the headpiece. To achieve this effect, I vary the length of the wire and the angle at which it's bent. With the last flower attached, the headpiece is complete. I truly believe this beautiful idea from the client helped me reach the new heights in my craft. And, judging from the client's reaction, I was able to match their expectations. The flower crown was the most intricate part of the look, but not the only one. The sleek silk dress, decorated with lace and beading, is coming next. This design was prepared specially for this very doll, and to start working on the garment, I need to first create a sewing pattern. I did this with the duct tape technique. This is a perfect method for a fitted piece. If you are interested, I have an in-depth video about it on my Patreon. The pattern was prepared and adjusted quite a few times, and to make sure it is ready for the final piece, I first made a mock-up. Here is the mock-up version of the dress. It is made from cotton poplin, which is cheap and quite stiff fabric. This mock-up doesn't look as good as the final piece, which will be sewed from the silk satin. But the purpose of it is to make sure that the fit is right and the overall silhouette is correct. The client already approved it, and that means I can proceed to making the actual dress. This is the fabric I am working with today. It is a medium density silk satin that I dyed blush pink in a very unaesthetic setting. It is a bit crinkly as I starched it. Later on I will wash the dress and it will be soft and flowy again. I am working with 100% natural silk, because it's beautiful and because I avoid anything synthetic in my works. The pattern is placed on the fabric and traced. There is no cut at the waist, so the skirt panels and the bottom of the bodice are one. This type of garment is a bit trickier to fit correctly, so I have to be extra precise. The design I am making vaguely reminds me of Regency fashion. The dresses from that period, which was early 19th century, were characterized by straight silhouettes, light fabrics and high waistlines. The other and maybe more accurate association is the 1930s gowns, sleek, glamorous and flowy. I even found a design with very similar shoulder details. But the overall style of 30s dresses is much more, I would say, aggressive. The dress I'm making has much more gentle feel to it, so it might as well be a combination of Regency and 1930s. When the pieces were cut, I started to pin the bodice together and basted the shoulder seam. I always baste the pieces before sewing because, again, that's a little more precise than just pins. When the first seam was done, I started working on the lace details on the shoulders. To hide the raw edges and make this detail as neat as possible from outside and inside, the lace is basically sandwiched in between the lining and the main fabric. To help me manage the folds on the lace and to make them even and symmetrical, I pressed those folds with an iron. Now it's time to arrange this lace sandwich. First, I basted the lace to the front of the dress. Then I placed the lining fabric on top of it, hiding the lace in between the two layers. There is no lining on the whole bodice to avoid bulk, only around the shoulder opening. When the layers were secured, I very carefully sewed all 3 of them on the machine. I didn't even touch the pedal, only rotated the hand wheel. Well, maybe just for a moment, but then it was back to the hand wheel. The sewed pieces turned so the lining is on the inside, and you can see how neat this detail looks. I pressed the seam, and then I hand-sewn around it to secure the lining in place, so it doesn't slip out when the piece is worn. Then the excess lining is cut off, and the edge is finished with fray check. After I sewed the side seam, it looked like the lace practically grows from the dress. When the 2 pieces of the bodice were complete, I turned back to the skirt. I pinned the first seam together, basted it and sewed it on the machine. Then, one by one, I sewed the rest of the seams. I didn't pin and sew them all in one go to be extra precise. If the whole skirt is pinned, especially in the waist area, it is incredibly easy to skew the pieces at least a bit, thus to make a skewed dress. When the seams were done, I arranged the skirt on my mannequin and pinned it in place. By the way, this mannequin was made from mountain foam, and it matches the shape of the doll's body perfectly. Then it was time for the bodice. I pinned it to the mannequin and then gathered the bust area by pulling a thread. The gathers form as I speak, but they are a bit messy. To make them neat and even, I manually arranged every single fold, damped the fabric to make it more malleable, and even used the aid of tweezers. The 2 parts of the dress are ready to become one. I basted the bodice and the skirt and carefully sewed them together by hand. I would never do the seam on the machine, as this one requires more accuracy than any other seam on this dress. With the dress fully sewed, I proceeded to add in the rest of the lace details. The first to go is the decoration under the bust. The lace is carefully gathered and sewed by hand with the threads matching the ivory color of the lace. Then I attached the buttons. The dress has a long row of pearl-like buttons on the back that are made of glass beads. Once again, no machine can do this for me. Following the buttons, a matching row of loops is added to the other side of the closure. You can see the blue marks here and there on the dress. Those are made with a special pen and are later removed with heat without a trace. With the lace attached and closure made, the top portion of the dress is almost done. It was time to work on the hem. I hand-sewed a long strip of lace over the entirety of it. In fact, I made 2 rows of stitches all over to make sure the lace is soundly secured, and I do it with the same invisible stitch as under the bust. The last bit of abundant lace decoration is on the neckline. I arranged the lace so only the frilled edge was visible and carefully sewed it in place with a running stitch. I used a thread that matches the fabric and kept the seam as neat and as invisible as possible. With the lace attached, the very last bit of decoration is the beadwork on the hem. Following the concept, I adorned the lace with a row of pink beads. This dress turned out to be surprisingly multicultural. I used Valenciennes lace to decorate it. It is a type of lace that originates from the town of Valenciennes, France. It is characterized by the smooth surface and exquisite details, which is what I love it for. The very lace I used for this dress was in fact produced in France. The beads I am sewing on are from Japan. Japanese beads are well known for high quality, uniform shape, and are considered to be one of the best in the world. It's so exciting when the supplies from such remote countries unite in one piece. And I believe it's important to remember the history and the origin of these products, as they are the pieces of art in their own right. The dress was done. Or was it? It followed the concepts to the last detail, and don't get me wrong, it was a beautiful dress. But I felt like one last detail was missing. I contacted the client and asked if they would mind if I added a matching row of beads on the bust line, and to my pleasure, they didn't. With the beading added, the very last step is a bit less exciting. If you are not new to my channel, you've seen it numerous times. I finished all the raw edges inside the dress with a blanket stitch. I decided to only show it briefly, but trust me, all the edges are finished. Now the dress was actually done, and I am beyond happy with how it turned out. Again, if not for this commission, I would never think of such design. I would probably stick to my usual sewing patterns and keep making loose designs with cut-off waists. And oh boy, I am so happy I had a chance to work on something sleek and elegant like this gown. This walk out of my comfort zone was a pleasant and rewarding one. with the dress finished, the costume is almost complete. Only one piece of the puzzle is left, and this one is always thrilling to see. Time to craft a doll-sized pair of elegant shoes. The concept calls for a pair of silk pumps with kitten heels, and I am making these shoes as usual on papier-mâché base. To prepare this base, I wrapped pieces of cloth soaked in glue over a shoe last. Both the heel and the toe piece are made in this manner, and when they dry, those templates are sanded to be smooth and even. With the base prepared, I could proceed to covering it with silk, but before I quickly painted it the matching pink color, so the base isn't visible through the fabric. It is very unlikely, but I did it just in case. Then the glue is applied to the papier-mâché, and the base is covered in silk, the same one the dress is made from. When the first round of glue dries, I carefully fold the edges of the fabric over the base and glue them down. With the toe and the heel of the shoe done, it was time to attach the sole. It was made in the same technique from papier-mâché and wrapped in matching fabric. The parts of the shoe are glued together on the last, then the sole is affixed at the bottom. Before moving on to the kitten heels, I addressed the inside of the shoes. They need to be nice and neat, not just on the outside. I glued a ribbon loop to the very back of the shoe, then covered the heel area with fabric. Next, I placed a silk insole. I made it from contrasting ivory fabric that fits with the overall color scheme of the doll. And now for the heels. I sculpted the tiny stompers, or I'd rather say click-clackers, from epoxy clay. When epoxy dried, I cut and sanded the template to make them as smooth as the rest of the shoe. All that was left was to cover the heels in fabric. I glued it down and folded the edges, then carefully cut the excess where needed. Now the shoes could be assembled. The heels are glued in place. I once again use carpentry glue for this purpose, well, for the entire shoes, to keep everything as strong as possible. Thus, the shoes are complete, and that would be a beautiful pair as it is for another doll. For this one, I cannot forget the flower decor. 2 silk roses were left from the middle of this project, and that's when they were put in their rightful place. Now this pair can truly be called the flower shoes. As the last touch, a silk ribbon is fed through the loop on the heel and tied in a bow on the ankle. And that, in the full sense of the word, was the finishing touch. Time to dress up the doll and see her in her full splendor. When I started working on this doll, I was already very excited and I expected it to be a great project. But the more time I dedicated to her, the more she exceeded my expectations. It was one of these moments when I felt like there are no boundaries for me, even though in fact I worked off an asserted concept. I am incredibly thankful to the clients for their wonderful ideas and for how nice it was to work for them. I hope the doll I created brings them joy for many, many years to come. If you wish to know more about my dolls, you can find information and photos on my website sophiedolls.com. My contacts, my website and my other social media are linked in the description. A very special thanks goes to my patrons. Your support truly means the world to me. If you want to support the channel and gain access to additional content, you can find the link to my Patreon in the description. But you can also support the channel by liking this video, writing a comment and subscribing. I respond to most comments and deeply appreciate each and every one of you. And thank you all from the bottom of my heart for watching this video. I hope you enjoyed, and please let me know what you think about the doll I created. I wish you all a great day and see you next time.